Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Philip, and I'm gonna explain you a little bit about what is right now happening in Lil Cup and how far we are actually into the metagame. We have taken the previous ban list of X and Y, or excuse me, Omega Roof F Sapphire, and we have then applied that to this generation, and we are going to take it in slight reverse in trying to unban that what was controversial and gonna resuspect what was also controversial but potentially had to look into again. And the primary Pokemon include Diglett, Gothita, and the last gen banned Pokemon Drifloon. Now, a lot of people were disagreeing in that Drifloon should have been banned last generation. I'm one of those people that was slightly disappointed, though I don't particularly care about this mon. It was more about being angry about the policy approach that went ahead with this Pokemon. Well, no, it wasn't actually a policy approach, rather just taking the general approach with this Pokemon. The same counted for Diglett because it actually applied this exact same thing to Diglett, just in absolute reverse. And that made no sense for it for this mon to then stay and this mon to then go for the similar reasoning. Now, actually, no, the reasoning for Drifloon primarily was that it had a multitude of sets that were each individually able to then take care of the potential answers, leaving such a select few Pokemon that ended up losing to relevant other Pokemon to the metagame. In this instance, Diglett, and therefore getting a Mon banned thanks to partial utility of Diglett, though I don't blame it necessarily on this Mon, though I do think it made part in it. Now, for the subject of why do I think Gothita will most definitely get banned, why I think Drifloon could be unbanned, and why I think Diglett probably won't be banned. Now, I would love to see Diglett get banned. I need to point that out. I hated this mon last generation. I still hate this mon this generation. The thing I hate so much about this mon in this generation compared to previous generation is the fact that people still underestimate it. In fact, they have completely wiped away what it did last generation and just assumed, well, I haven't seen anything done by the thing yet, so how can it do something then? Well, the primary reason it has not done anything yet is because the primary set people ran, or proper people ran, I should say, is going to be the focus sesh set, which, as I pointed out last generation, is by far the easiest to deal with. It is a laughably stupid bad set as a threat on its own. Is it counter lead slash revenge killer-ish? It's not even meant to revenge kill, that's the stupid part. And lastly, it is an anti-utility mon in that regard. It was not meant to be a threat with this set, so I don't see your point in saying, well, I haven't seen anything done with it yet. Well, obvious reasons why. It had no reason to with this set. Like, are people ignoring that part, or am I the only one seeing this? The reason why I'm saying the mon still has the same utility, well, let me actually point that out. While it lost Fletchling, it gained Rufflet, it gained a stronger Volby, and it gained Doduo. On top of that, certain other Pokemon, for example Drifloon, could be back. Other Pokemon like Shelder are still as good as ever. The only thing I see slightly hindering Shelder would be Mudbray, and the only thing about Mudbray I'm going to point out is the fact that it introduced more direct ground answering water types and a few more ground answering grass types. Neither of those are honestly all that scary to deal with, primarily because they were already relevant to begin with, just slightly more common. And I'm saying this, not even exaggerate, slightly more common. I would say Pumpkaboo is the only noticeably more common one. All the other ones are still as... Even some Pokemon like Snivy got lowered in terms of being common, so it's a lifting weight thing. And the thing is, Diglett never cared about those mons to begin with, so I don't see the point. As Blara made with a very valid discussion. This is, by the way, the thread in which it was discussed. The council is gonna vote for this, only the council, and I don't particularly mind that, though I don't really agree with that either. I don't mind per se. I just hope they make the right decision, but After all, I have a very extremistic opinion, so my opinion could be false, you could say. Blara actually made a very good post with it. I had to look it up. This is another post that I actually prefer more. This was the all-applying argument in which, in this argument, if Diglett is not going to be able to support a team for removing relevant threats, for example, in the example of Shelter plus Diglett, well, if you don't have a Magnemite, Chinchou, or Poniard on your team to answer, to be trapped by Diglett, well, what do you have for Shelter then? Like, Diglett wouldn't need to do anything in that match. I would use it as dead fodder in that match for the good reason because it already did its job. If you are using an unprepared team, well, then you're using an unprepared team. You're just gonna straight up lose to a setup sweeper, for example, Shelter in this instance. Well, say I were to use a prepared team, I would need to use Poniard, Chinchou, and or Shelter. And all of the, excuse me, and or Chinchou. No, Chinchou, Magnemite, Poniard. Anyways, now a lot of these mons are often enough paired with two. There are other options as well, for example, certain bulky water types, though those are more easily worn down than actually able to answer Shelter directly. The biggest issue they have is they are 2-hit KO'd at best for them, with the exception of Slowpoke, which has gotten more viable, but once Drifloon will be introduced, that will be contrary. And I'm gonna address Drifloon in this argument a slight bit later, but I'm gonna point out, unlike last generation, Diglett is gonna be less influential to Drifloon, if you were to ask me. Though we have obtained Mudbray, and not much has changed, the way the damage rolls now are disfavored for Drifloon in regards of being able to Will-O-Wisp stall, because last generation, if you actually look at the odds of a Pokemon not being crit, just being able to constantly recycle, substitute, stall the opponent, your odds were favored because of the amount of damage you did, especially finishing it off with Acrobatic, or even finishing it off completely safe and being able to keep up that momentum. However, I very much want to address the fact that if you don't have, and for those who want to argue about this, I will actually leave this thread as well as the current one in the description, because this actually explained a lot about mostly why Diglett was suspected, as well as a lot of other things about it, and a lot of extreme points in regards, but I myself am a very extremistic person in opinion. I have no reason to say I'm not, because it's completely true. Now, as I was saying with the Diglett set, the Life Orb set, as I said last generation, was the best set that mostly ran this set, though Rock Slide was the most substitutable move for something like Memento, Stealth Rocks, those things. Substitute, probably one of the most important moves to deal with Poniard, though it wasn't even necessary to deal with Poniard if you ask me. This generation is even less necessary. Sucker Punch has been nerfed, though that is a slight drawback for Diglett, his damage output, but it's gonna be able to survive a Sucker Punch for Poniard, and then have some HP left to even fire off another EQ for another Pokemon. That's pretty scary if you ask me. Now, this generation, I feel like Memento is a much more useful move on this slot. You can still use Sludge Bomb. I don't really think that's all that good of a move to begin with, especially in this generation where Cottonee is less useful. But it's still a relevant move. In fact, this is the usage stats of the last month. Rock Slide. Don't particularly agree with it being more used than Sucker Punch, though it still has use, especially with the introduction of Drifloon. It's useful. Now, talking about adaptations, Diglett actually got one more set gained, the Dark EMZ set. This is a fun set rather than an actually straight up good set. I don't think it's straight up that good. It gives you Memento, which, if you click Memento, you basically drop the opponent's attack and special attack by 2. and therefore another Pokemon, for example Setup Sweeper, it's going to be able to very safely set up and then continue to kill something. Now say I have a Diglett plus a Shelter. Shelter is already worn for some reason. This is going to be allowing me to actually get that thing back up to HP. Now it's not going to remove status or anything, so it's not like Healing Wish, but it's almost like Healing Wish. As well as having a very nice side effect. Though it's a one-time usable, you're not going to be able to use Life Orb, and you're also not going to be able to take any hits because you're still just Diglett. Okay, fair enough. Now, you also have Sucker Punch, boosted by Dark EMZ. This is a 140 base Dark type move that's going to be able to very hardly attack whatever Pokemon stands in its way. And I'm actually going to show you just the damage calc of how powerful that actually is. I'm using the Jake White damage calc because that's the only damage calc that actually takes into account a lot of stuff like Water Bubble, as I was just calcing, Fluffy, which is still not fixed, I think. Bubble Beam is not a physical attack in that. There are a few minor things wrong with the damage calc, especially with some new stuff, but I don't mind too much. But for the ease of this, I'm just gonna show you this, because it doesn't take all that much effort to actually put it in. Now this is just a Z-move boosted Sucker Punch against Drifloon. This is max. Why is that Eviolite? Why is that Eviolite? This is a max defensive set. This is one that is even running Bold Nature, and it's not even meant to run Bold Nature. So this is going to be a 50% chance to one-hit KO Drifloon on a switch in. And if Stealth Rocks are up, that's on the guaranteed KO. Now, going back to Pumpkaboo Super, probably the only other mon you're going to try to hit with this thing. Let's do 224, right? 224? 204, that's it, yeah. 204. Oh, that's not gonna... this is meant to be with Eviolite as well, and that's a massive amount of damage. Now it's not going to be able to actually KO this Pokemon, especially if you look at the calculations for the damage. That's not enough. That's not enough. It's enough to actually dent this Pokemon, especially if it's already worn down by whatever kind of water attack or a poison by Sludge Bomb from Fungus or something along those lines. You understand the basic going. If you actually get this Pokemon worn down enough, I guess you could KO it. There's a handful of other Pokemon, but the big issue with this is it can just switch out. This is a ghost type Pokemon, so in this situation it could switch out, so that makes the move on its own a lot less useful. And we also have Gothita, probably the only other mon that I would say is even worth considering these calcs for. Just gonna make it easy for myself with these. Let's see, Eviolite. That's a great amount of damage, enough to actually pick up the KO combined. That's 16 plus 7, that's 23, that's perfect. Doesn't even need Stealth Rocks for that. But that's a fun set. I don't particularly think it's all that good to begin with, but it's worth using at least. It adds a slight bit to its utility. The thing about this mon is that, as much as was already discussed, I very much think it is still as effectively broken as it was last generation. Though it has not shown as much as last generation, that is irrelevant to how the mon works. Just like saying, oh well, during the Misty metagame, or right after the Misty metagame, nobody uses it. Well, we also didn't particularly use Recycle Drifloon. In fact, I only know one person that during that time period used Recycle Drifloon, which was Ricket. Yes. And for those people who still think that was a straw man, that's not a straw man. That person exists. You can even look at his Twitter if you really want. You can ask it himself. Don't bother the guy too much though. He stopped playing for LC, by the way. Good guy though. If you're watching this, Ricket, you're a good guy. Now, as I was saying, the Focus Sash set is the most used set currently. Was the most used set currently because it dealt with Cutiefly. If you're running Haysup's variation that used Reversal, excuse me. Reversal allowed it to chip enough damage on Onyx for Earthquake to always KO, unlike Rock Slide who had a chance to miss. It also gives you the utility of being able to go for... what's the name again? It also gives you the utility of being able to prevent Porygon from switching in and then setting up on you if you are down to your sash, which is pretty nice. Other things that it can do is can counter lead by setting up stealth rocks. It can do just a few things. Again, this is a supportive slash anti-lead set. At best, you're gonna trap something that is very prone to you and already worn, but you're gonna miss out on so many important KOs that Life Orb Diglett could provide. For example, Pokemon like Ponyta as primary examples, Pokemon like Larvesta as primary examples. And just for a record, if you're running Rock Slide without Life Orb, why exactly? Larvesta is going to be able to survive that if it's the bulky set, and if it's the Scarf set, it's not going to be able to be hit anyway. It's going to kill you. That is for a lot of Scarf Mon, by the way. The thing about Scarf Mons is that it forces a very offensive turn, and this is the turn that we actually wanted to take at the end of the Diglett Suspect. The conclusion basically came down to, we can go two approaches. We can go for a more balanced approach, back to the Inf turn, like metagame, with Inf turn as being just an example. The metagame would be as... the dominant playstyle in the metagame would be balance. Balance, for those who wonder, is primarily based around bulky tanks, slow pivots, momentum gaining Pokemon like Minfu, Fungus, those kind of things, as well as having decent hazard removal, trying to just keep up with the current pace, as well as trying to counteract as many as possible playstyles while doing so. That was a greatly balanced metagame. Now Diglett got more used right after that metagame as an answer to it. And the way it did that, it got people thinking, why can't we apply this to other stuff and use it against other stuff? And that's when people realized how good it could actually be. Now it's a subject of debate whether or not you agree with this mon or not, but this mon, if you don't agree with it, I very much want to question what your reasoning is, because this one has a large range of points to go for, ranging from simply having two sets that so damn well answer each other's weaknesses, or at least wither down those weaknesses, or revenge kill those weaknesses if they were withered. This one can switch into Pokemon like Fungus, Staryu, what was the other one again? Pokemon like Spritzy, Pokemon like... during the QT5 metagame, it could also switch into Pokemon like Abra, because it's just Abra, and other stuff. A lot of things, actually. Now, a lot of Pokemon, especially Pokemon like Staryu. Staryu is phenomenal in this metagame. And having this mon being able to literally just switch in, even if it's analytic, it's just going to take a bit more damage and it's going to need to rest one turn faster, sure. But it's going to be able to set up multiple Calm Minds rather easily. The only thing that's going to save you is getting a crit. That's about the only thing that's going to save you from losing to this mon. It's a very, very shitty mon in that regard. Now, this mon can essentially set up Calm Minds against a large variety of mons, because that's what this set was refined to do. There are a few things that you can change about the set. You can change these two IVs, because they don't really matter if you put them into more HP or more special defense. I guess you can go to 16 special defense, but I question the point, because having more speed is overall more useful, or having more special attack, because you're hitting 14 special attack, is also more useful. Now, you can debate. Another move you can actually drop is, I've seen people drop this for Thunderbolt. I've even seen people just go in a different approach with the Eviolite set and just make it like 14 speed, bulkier set, something along like 21 HP I think it was, and then something along these lines or something similar to this was also a set I've seen people utilize. That's gonna mostly use something like Thunderbolt, Psychic, Thunder Wave, potentially even Energy Ball instead of Thunder Wave. I really hate the Thunder Wave set. It's perhaps one of the worst sets for it. Dawn is still worse if you're asking me, but okay. The Scarf set, Scarf is gonna be able to outspeed Pokemon like Vullaby. It's gonna be able to outspeed Pokemon like Ponyard. No, what am I saying? It's Ponyard. It's gonna be able to outspeed Pokemon like Diglett, Pokemon like a pretty decent variety of Pokemon that would otherwise be able to effectively take this thing on, especially if they're more offensively based, because this is a stall breaking set, so everything that's bulky is gonna lose to this. Now the Scarf set actually got access to Trick. Trick is perhaps the most important move at the start of X and Y to make clear this mon can now also beat stall because of this. I don't think Trick is all that useful for it to begin with, but it's definitely a useful move, and if you know how to utilize it, it can be about as threatening as having an entire Wynot on your team. But I'm not going to go all that much into debate whether or not the best sets are. Now, for those people liking to discuss hidden power sets on this thing, the most important hidden power moves that I've seen are hidden power fire. I've seen few people run hidden power ground. I don't think it's worth that much. Just use Diglett at that point. And I've seen one person use hidden power poison. Apparently HeySub has seen a lot more, or he just made a joke about it, I don't know. Either way, I think it's fairly funny that he actually complained about that. There's not all that much to change about this set because it's just standalone, a very good set. Now why is this set in particular so damn good this generation? Well, with the change of dark type Pokemon being no longer affected by Prankster, Cottony single-handedly hindered down Pokemon, specifically Pokemon like Scraggy. Scraggy had very firm competition from opposing Fight-type Pokemon, as Fight-type Pokemon beat Scraggy. A Fight-type Pokemon that's not going to be able to beat other Fight-type Pokemon is pretty damn shitty if you're not going to run Sand Headbutt, and Sand Headbutt is quite necessary. Pokemon like Cottony could just Encore you the moment you Dragon Dance up. Pokemon like Cottony can Stun Spore you the moment you Dragon Dance up. Pokemon like Cottony can put up Tailwind the moment you Dragon Dance up. Every one of those options, with the exception of the last one, has been taken away. Now Fight-type Pokemon are still relevant, those are going to be still answers to that thing, so it's not necessarily broken for that, but then suddenly this thing comes in, or this thing for that matter, and it's going to be able to deal with a large variety of Fight-type Pokemon. Where's your answer now? Now, not being able to Encore Trapped means if you're just going to run Poison Jab, Scraggy, you're not going to be able to lose to Cottony. Cottony can at best prevent you from setting up when checking that thing. If you're already set up one Dragon Dance and then it comes in, it would need to go for Dazzling Gleam. You're gonna die to Poison Jab that turn. You can't Encore it anymore thanks to how Dark types are immune to Prankster right now, so that's pretty stupid for Cottony. And that hinders down Cottony quite a bit. Now it can still use Tailwind, and I definitely think Tailwind is perhaps one of the most useful moves on it. But other Pokemon, for example Fletchling, have been taken down. Sure, we have Pokemon like Doduo, Pokemon like Vullaby, and even Rufflet. Except once I Dragon Dance up, I outspeed, and maybe if it's a Scarf Rufflet or a Scarf Doduo, Scarf Rufflet did need to be running a good bit of speed. Scarf Doduo would not need to run any real speed investment other than how it should regularly run a lot of speed. You could even go Animate for that matter. But you get my point. There is not a lot to then answer it anymore, because Fletchling was quite relevant, not necessarily broken in that regard, far from, but pretty relevant in dealing with it, also dealt with Sun. As for the subject of Sun, Diglett answers Sun, and with the popular increase of Sun, I see little reason for this mon to not be a lot more relevant for that, especially with something like a Life Orb set. Regardless. Then lastly we have Drifloon. Now Drifloon is a mon that I advocated a good bit for last generation in terms of, well, it's not broken. It has a large variety of sets, each with their individual answers, and the main thing Drifloon is going for it is that it needs to have the illusion of having all the sets that beat everything. The moment it shows that it is an acrobatic bulkier set, or it shows Will-O-Wisp, practically over half of your utility is gone by that. A team doesn't need to have two answers specifically dedicated to say like beat this, beat that. I can show you literally a handful of teams that would just have this could answer that set, this could answer that set. You just need to have one reliable answer, and you're gonna need the opportunity just to scout the set. Now the issue with that is it needs to have an opportunity, and while doing that scouting, you give Drifloon an opportunity. And that's the only main thing that people mind about that. Now the thing I hate too much about it is because there is little reason for it not to be utilized on the vast majority of every team. I'm not even exaggerating with that. It has such a large variety of move options, and I've even discussed that in an earlier video about how good those actually work. But the moment you see, oh, it utilized Hex. This could be either a Calm Mind set or a Recycle Calm Mind set, or a Recycle Will-O-Wisp set, which is just a standard set but with Hex. You can also have the Calm Mind set, which is also another thing. I'm not saying it isn't. But overall, this mon is going to mostly be very reliant on matchup, because it's not going to be able to beat all those mons. It's not going to be able to beat your answers if you just have the right answer. Now, that's not going to be necessary to even dedicate saying, oh, I need to have two answers for this, I need to have two answers for that. Pokemon like Fletchling, Pokemon like Pawniard, and Pokemon like Mienfoo are generally over-prepared for, because they have a large variety of things that act similarly or act simply that powerfully. Pokemon like Pawniard, if your team only has Mienfoo to deal with Pawniard, it could be argued that it's rather weak against Pawniard, for obvious reasons. Pokemon like Mienfoo, if you're not going to have two answers to Fight-type Pokemon, or at least two ways of reliably beating Fight-type Pokemon, you're kind of gonna lose to Fight-type Pokemon. If you're not gonna have an answer to Omanyte, you're not gonna have an answer to Omanyte, and Omanyte doesn't really have that many answers. And it will get that setup opportunity, don't mind about that. Now, the primary thing that changed compared to last generation is Will-O-Wisp and Mudbray. Mudbray introduced a lot more reliable water-type Pokemon. Now, with the exception of Slowbro, about every one of those water modes are irritating for regular Drifloon set. Not having as effective Will-O-Wisp, if you count up the amount of turns it's going to be able to utilize Substitute plus Recycle, and going to be able to then take a hit and whatever, it has the odds against itself at that point, and it's not going to be able to do as much damage as it used to. In fact, it's not going to be able to stall out as many Pokemon as it used to. I still think it's going to be very relevant to point out that a lot of people minded the burn status. I don't particularly think that's worrisome. Any team should have a way of preparing against burn status, and not just, oh, let me just stick on Diglett. Yeah, Ponyta and Lorvesta are not going to be a problem. I find that, how do I refer to this? Lazy? If that's your true approach. Pokemon like Pumpkaboo can still come in, Will-O-Wisp stuff. Pokemon like Ghastly can come in and Will-O-Wisp stuff. And this is also why I think the Ghastly set was perhaps that good. Like, I genuinely question if that's truly the way of approach. Now, that was just an example, not per se thinking like, oh, that is how people beat it. No. I do, however, think having a relevant way of dealing with a status condition is pretty relevant. Of course, you can't deal per se with Freeze, except if you have a bulky water type with Scald, which, it's not even that hard to prepare for, but you get my point. You don't particularly need to prepare for status, but at least having a way of somewhat dealing with the most relevant things to then deal with the status should be mandatory for any team, in my opinion. If you're gonna use an offensive team, you're gonna try to keep up that momentum, and gonna be able to trade opportunities in order to keep up that momentum. So I don't see your valid point with that. Now, this thing though, especially for offense, this thing is a big letdown. This thing is a big stop, I should say. It's gonna be able to both switch in Revenge, and once it has the opportunity, it can literally take down a large variety of offensive teams. Now this mon can single-handedly force a slightly more balanced oriented metagame, and if these two trappers were gone, that would be perfectly fine. That would literally be perfectly fine, and I can literally give you an entire reasoning why that would be. I'm not gonna go all too much into that, as I literally did a full video on that earlier, as well as multiple threads literally being able to discuss this argument, as well as my post that I made on this thread, though it was kind of messy, and I do agree that I could have worded it much better. Unfortunately, either way. Where's my post? Around here, I think. Yeah, this. You can read it up if you like. I did try to do it in a more personal way. I went a lot with talking about where is it? Yeah, this. I went much more with the approach of answering something that I should have answered in the last suspect, because this was a point people actually made in the last suspect, where say I have Xmon beats Y and Zmon. Well, Y and Zmon are balanced mons in the metagame, or Y and Zmon are broken mons in the metagame. Either way, if Xmon beats Y and Zmon, therefore we need to keep Xmon. That wouldn't make Y and Zmon balanced. That is irrelevant. And if Xmon is going to be able to beat Y and Zmon, but also going to beat A, B, C, D, E, F, G mons, then we could perhaps look at Xmon rather than focusing on Y and Zmon. This is a very simple form that I'm trying to describe to you, and I very much question why people think it's valid to say, well, if we keep in one mon, that's going to balance out other mons. But if that one mon is broken, of course it's going to balance that out, but it's going to break everything else. I can just as well say, well, let's introduce Mega Rayquaza into it here. That's gonna fix broken Diglett, that's gonna fix this, it's gonna fix that. Well, okay, actually, let's introduce Primal Groundon. That might be a bit easier to then point that out. Primal Groundon. Well, Primal Groundon is gonna be a very big thing to stop Pokemon like Chinchou from being as good as they are. Without question, in fact. Oh wait, it's gonna break everything. But that's just a point of discussion, and with Diglett in that, that's a very controversial one, because that's the argument of trappers, and trappers work distinctively different than any other thing, honestly. So comparing it as well as the mocking joke, that has been a joke for the last months before the new generation started. Now, I'm gonna talk to you finally about what sets are the best sets for Drifloon. Now, I do think that if you're utilizing the recycle set is mostly used very early in the battle, at turn 12 or something along those lines, out of 26 if you're using offense, and if you're using Drifloon, that's going to be 40, 50. This mon is going to be able to, more preferably, early on in the game, come in, will-wisp something when it has the opportunity, and then just continue from that point on. Now, the primary sets that I'm going to recommend are these two. Hex, with something along these lines of spread. Now, I've also seen some people drop some attack, go into a bit more special attack. I have seen some people go for acrobatic still, even though that completely loses to Mudbray. I really like Hex with Recycle. That's a good set. That's a really good set. Now, Drifloon has some other sets, primarily looking at Drifloon with the Calmite set. Now, the Calmite set has a handful of disadvantages, primarily being that it's completely matchup based, and then secondly, Thunderbolt. And then secondly, it's going to rely a lot about some other things like matchup. It's going to rely a lot about matchup, but it's primarily going to be focusing on being utilized later in the game to clean the game, or to break through certain parts. Now that's not per se a wall breaker, but that is most definitely a way to block offense, as you're literally going to be able to punish their offensive presence with that. Now I've seen few Calm Mind variations, mostly with Hex Will-O-Wisp, Shadow Ball, Calm Mind, Thunderbolt, and then Recycle, Substitute, or Battle Pass. Now those are the primary things you're going to be utilizing on that Pokemon. I've also seen some insanely defensively oriented things in these sets, like something along these kind of lines of a spread. This is insanely defensive in my opinion. This is primarily the one used with Substitute because of the odd HP. But you kind of get my point. That's very, very defensive while also having some pretty decent offense. Now, I do see the point that people did like to run a more offensive set on Drifloon. That's perfectly fine. I can see why that is. Especially if you're using something like Shadow Ball, Acrobatic, Will-O-Wisp, then Recycle. Or just drop Will-O-Wisp, go for Substitute. Just this offensive set, not even utilizing Will-O-Wisp anymore. I can see why that is. Now that's primarily going to be something of this form. Minus defense could just as well work. I can see why. I can also see why you would do this, though I do think having this, or at least having Hex, is a lot more important because of Mudbray, as well as a handful of other Pokemon. I can talk to you about why certain Pokemon are important on every team. Especially right now, I think Restock Mantike is highly underestimated in terms of how good it actually is. And if this one were to be brought back into the metagame, you can fully see why that is. Now the sets that I actually liked the most last generation were the Battle Pass Calm Mind set and this set. Now I hated this set when Frick actually used it against me, because I hated it for good reasons. It was a stupid set. Now you can run Substitute over Shadow Ball, you can run Hex over Acrobatic, you can run Shadow Ball over Acrobatic, you can even run Will-O-Wisp plus Hex, but I don't really see the point. The point of this set is primarily to just keep on its offensive presence and then going for a weakness policy boost with Ender. This is actually meant to be more offensive as well. The point is actually to sustain yourself as much as possible while also having as much presence as possible. Now, you can run a good bit more defense, excuse me. For example, this. That's going to be more helpful because that means you don't need to use Ender. And thanks to Fledgling not being there anymore to revenge kill you, that's also amazing. There is little to stop you once you have that boost up, thanks to your type and your resistance to many forms of priority. Well, not resistance, immunity to many forms of priority, primarily looking at extreme speeds, Mag Punch, and Vacuum Wave, but you're still weak to Aqua Jet and you're still weak to Sucker Punch. But Sucker Punch is a bit of an odd one because you can just use Substitute or Will-O-Wisp that turn. Good point. With the addition of Z-Stones, I don't particularly think it's going to be worse because of that, especially this set. Like, just knockoff, you just suddenly have your +2 attack to +2 special attack, and yes, this thing activates before knockoff knocks off your item. This thing boosts, and then you're not going to be knocked off an item because you used your item. The same way Red Guard works, if I think about it. I don't know if Red Guard actually does that. I used Red Guard too little. Now the other recycle set I probably forgot to talk about is this one. Now we're seeing a lot of mono ghost type attack. Well, Porygon has disappeared in our tier. There's good reason to use a mono attacking set for this. Now, much like the Calm Mind set, it's going to use a very bulky spread. I still think running his 14 special defense set is still very arguable, and for good reasons, honestly. But something like this, that's threatening. Something like this is also still threatening. I don't really think you should underestimate how good this mon actually is. This should be utilizing Calm, because it's 27 and 14 special defense, which allows you to deal with Pokemon like, Oh wait, this is with Calm Mind. Never mind then. Never mind. Calcs. Like, there are a lot of calcs in my head and I'm just rattling about. So at this point I'm gonna actually end the video because there's not much point to still explain these things. Well, the Calm Mind set, you just have a reliable Calm Mind passer, which is great. Good for any bet and pass team. And then we have the weakness policy ender set, which apparently was it Infamy? Or was it Gao? I think it was Gao. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but I don't know how I would otherwise pronounce his name. I think it was Gao that utilized this. I don't know. I don't focus too much on him in particular. But still, he utilized this set, got a good bit out of it. I actually thought this set really well paired with primarily stall set as well as some offensive set like this. Now there's one more Drifloon set that I actually forgot to talk about. Excuse me for that crack. Shadow Ball, Icy Wind, Thunderbolt, and Trick. That's the set. That's all there is about the set. That's all there is. Actually, you should be investing a bit more into defense as well. This actually gives you a bit more than 27 HP because proportions. As I was saying, this set essentially gives you the utility to, I think, 2-hit KO Mudbraid was. Drifloon. Five, 196, 196, Dimit. Why am I even bothering to put that in? Shadow Ball. And Icy Wind. As well as a choice specs. Now it's not Icy Wind that's going to be the most damaging move, but moves like Shadow Ball, as well as the utility of Icy Wind, honestly. Icy Wind is going to be able to do this much damage against Evilite Mudbray. That's even less than I expected, holy shit. As I said last generation, I'm really not a fan of this set. That's pathetic. That's pathetic. Does it even get any moves that actually boost that? What the fuck? No, it doesn't. What the hell? That's weak. That's actually weak. I expected a bit more than that. Ew. As I said, this is not a good set for it, and I have good reasons to not even show that. Anyhow. Drifloon has a large variety of things to go for, as well as a large variety of things, but as you can see with a lot of things, it can't really prepare for a lot of stuff, as much as running a different set that would give you better opportunity against it, though it wouldn't per se make you beat that. A lot of mons count for this, especially because the thing that I said about Drifloon, if you have Drifloon, you can run so many weird options. You can run Defog. This is actually arguably still viable, because it's just Will-O-Wisp stalls combined with Defog, which has definitely gone down as a utility, without question even, especially with Recycle as you use. That's good, that's pretty good. It also gets other moves, like Thunder Wave, it also gets Tailwinds, it also gets Knockoff, I think it was. It also gets, like, yeah, Knockoff. Like, there's a good bit of use in that, but not particularly what I would say, like, something you should typically run. Same for the choice spec set. I don't even think that's even worth listing, because of just generally the Calm Mind set outclasses most of the utility that has, and seeing how Mudbray simply walls that's somewhat laughable in my opinion. This is a special defensive Mudbray. I question if the lesser special defensive, which something along this line, okay. That's still gonna be able. Wow. Either way, this is a fun little mon. Most definitely very viable, and will always stay viable if you were to ask me. But I don't think it's broken. And as much as I could simply rattle on about why I don't think it is, I have already made a discussion video about saying, well, say I have only a Poniard and a Chinchou on my team. Well, say he is the Calm Mind set and starts to then set up on something like Xinjiao. Well, actually, that's a horrible example. Okay. Well, then I know he isn't Will-O-Wisp. If he already... Okay, that's... Examples. I'm always horrible at examples. Holy shit. Say I have a Pokemon like... Goddamn. Larvesta. If he showcased he is Will-O-Wisp Hex with Calm Mind. Or if he showcased he is the Calm Mind set without Recycle. Larvesta suddenly can come in and actually beat that thing. A bug type is going to be able to beat a ghost flying type. That sounds stupid. But that's not stupid. That is just thinking logically about how you can adapt to the situation. And you can do a lot to change your odds in that situation. Because for example, Chinchou, well, okay, Chinchou is not going to be able to answer that. What do I have on my team that would otherwise be able to answer that? Oh, I have a Larvesta. Perhaps Larvesta could then beat this thing. So I need to preserve Larvesta a bit more. Perhaps preserve Chinchou as well. Maybe something else I don't need to preserve, or maybe something else that I need to be more prepared for pre-match in regards of these or these things, because genuinely maybe I'm too weak to something else. Now there is a large variety of things, and the most Pokemon that beat Drifloon, unlike the Pokemon that Diglett actually beats, being very relevant, Drifloon loses to very relevant mons. Pokemon like Ponyta, Pokemon like Chinchou, Pokemon like Magnemite, Pokemon like, well, not per se Ponyard, but Ponyard as well. Even right now with the Berry Juice set, it doesn't even need to use a Berry Juice set. The Evian Light set is going to be able to have odds against the Drifloon, and that's very good. Have the odds against Drifloon. That's what I was trying to say. Pokemon like Munchlax are going to be completely walling every single viable set, because Acrobatic set is much less viable because of Mudbray and stuff alike. Like, I can smack on a large variety of combinations, especially with a bit older set, which is Mudbray plus Munchlax. That was a great set. That was a great core. I mean, it has a lot of weaknesses. Like, it's not meant to be a core, but it's a defensive orientation of having a physical wall as well as a special base wall. You can also substitute that for something like Snubble. Though I don't particularly think that's as relevant anymore, especially if Drifloon were to be introduced. But it would still be a pretty decent mon, especially having the Thief utility against it. That's not something Drifloon wants to even risk, now is it? Now, as I was saying, I'm gonna end this video here, as I was trying to say a couple of minutes ago as well. I hope this video was informative for you. The council is gonna make hopefully a very good thing to it. I still think Diglett probably won't be banned, but I still see very good reasons to ban this mon, as you can see with the thing I have on screen right now. That thing, yeah. Gothita is highly definitely going to be banned. It pairs so well with Pokemon like Scraggy. I didn't even point that out. Wow. It pairs extremely well with Pokemon like Carvanha, Pokemon like Scraggy, Pokemon like Nasty Plot Vullaby, especially Nasty Plot Vullaby. Vullaby actually got a lot of good stuff. I'm looking at the Mirror Move sets, Dark EMZ Mirror Moves, Flying EMZ Mirror Move sets, which gives you +2 attack. I'm looking at the Weakness Policy Nasty Plot sets, which is gonna give you +2 speed, just -1 defense, just by your ability, so you can still use Eviolite, still use Berry Juice, whatever. Even switch in on a U-turn. It's practically insane in that regard. But that's Vullaby. That's a completely different discussion. But as I was saying, Drifloon, I have good hopes for this mon. I can see if they were to choose to keep this thing banned, I wouldn't mind that. As I said previously, I don't care too much for this mon. I legit don't. I'm not Madoka. I legit don't.